The moment my son-in-law handed me the microphone in front of 63 of my own employees, I thought about something my father used to say when I was 11 years old, helping him patch fence line in the dark. You don't have to explain yourself to a man who's standing in your barn. My name is Arlo Bassett. I'm 57 years old. My hands still look like I drove trucks for a living, which I did for about 4 years, before I figured out that the man scheduling those trucks was making 3 times what I was and working half the hours. I want to tell you about the Tuesday morning my son-in-law stood at the front of our main conference room on Route 40, called me up to the podium to show the room what an outdated way of thinking looked like, and then watched 63 people read the same document on the screen behind his head. Not because I arranged it, because a woman named Maxine from compliance had been waiting for 2 years for someone with standing to ask. Before I get into that, let me take you back to where this started. I grew up in Xenia, Ohio, population around 25,000 when I was a kid, smaller now. The kind of place where the big news is whether the county fair gets rained out. My father drove a milk delivery route his whole adult life, up at 4, done by 2 in the afternoon, but the work had a way of following him home in his posture and his silence. He never complained. He just kept showing up. I started driving for Granger Regional Freight right out of high school. Class A CDL at 19, running I-70 between Columbus and Indianapolis mostly, sometimes swinging east toward Pittsburgh. Long stretches of highway and bad coffee, and a lot of time to think. What I kept thinking was that somebody was getting rich off all this movement, and it wasn't the men in the cabs. At 29, I borrowed $40,000 against my wife, Lois's parents' house. She made me promise I'd pay it back before they noticed how scared I was, and I started Bassett Freight Solutions out of a leased lot on the south side of Dayton. 2 trucks, one of which I drove myself for the first 18 months. Lois handled dispatch and billing from a spare bedroom until we could afford a real office. I remember eating a lot of peanut butter sandwiches that first winter and telling myself that was fine, that this was just what the beginning looked like. 23 years later, we had 41 trucks, 3 terminals, and a payroll of 98 people. Mostly folks from Xenia and Dayton and the Springfield corridor, drivers, dock workers, dispatchers, mechanics, people who needed steady wages, a real health plan, and a boss who remembered their kids' names and actually meant it when he asked. Lois was sick for 2 years before we knew what it was. By the time we knew, there wasn't much left to do besides be there. She passed on a Friday in March, 2 days before our daughter Dana's 27th birthday. I kept the company running because 98 people were depending on a check arriving every 2 weeks. You don't get to stop. The work kept me upright, which I imagine it was supposed to. At 53, I sold 65% of Bassett Freight Solutions to Meridian Logistics Capital, a private equity group out of Nashville. They had money and regional reach. I had infrastructure, long-standing contracts, and a workforce that actually showed up. It felt like a fair exchange. They rebranded everything. New name, Meridian Freight Mid-Ohio. New signage on all 3 terminals. Fresh navy polo shirts for the office staff. I kept my 35%, a seat on the advisory committee, and one provision in the operating agreement that my attorney Rupert Gaines described as unusual. I told him it was the only thing I cared about besides the price. He said, "They're going to sign this without really reading it." I said, "I know." Dana met Colton Ashby at a sales leadership conference in Nashville. She called me that same evening, voice doing the thing it does when she's trying to sound casual about something she's already decided. He had a Vanderbilt MBA, a background in supply chain consulting, and she said, a plan for everything. She meant it the way people mean it when they've just met someone who makes the world feel more organized. I met him 6 weeks later at a steakhouse near her apartment in Columbus. He had a firm handshake, good posture, and eyes that were always doing quiet math on the room. He asked me 2 questions about myself before spending 40 minutes talking about his framework for evaluating operational inefficiency. Dana watched him the way people watch a fire when they're cold. I told myself she's happy. That's what matters. They married when Dana was 31. I walked her down the aisle at a venue in Dublin that cost more than my first truck. I shook Colton's hand at the altar. His grip was controlled. His eyes were already moving. The first year he was polite. He remembered to ask about my knee. He showed up to Christmas on time. Year 2, something shifted. He started finishing my sentences at the dinner table. or redirecting them. If I mentioned anything about freight rates or driver retention, he'd tilt his head slightly, like a professor acknowledging a student who got the concept almost right. Not hostile, just certain. The certainty of a man who has a framework for everything and assumes yours doesn't measure up. Dana would find my eye across the table and give me a small look, a look that said, please. So I let it go. Again and again for 3 years, I let it go. Here's what I want you to understand about that. When Lois died, Dana was the thing I had left. I would have sat at a table twice as uncomfortable and kept my mouth shut twice as long before I let friction with her husband become something she had to manage every holiday. That was my choice, not weakness, a choice. I say that so you understand what I was holding the whole time. Thanksgiving 2024. Their place in Powell, a newer construction with a 4-car garage Colton had described by square footage every time I visited. Dana had made her mother's sweet potato casserole. Their son Caden, 6 years old, sat next to me and spent most of dinner trying to explain the plot of a cartoon I'd never seen. I was happy to listen. Colton was talking about the company. Meridian's Q4 projections, a new initiative he was calling the Forward Ready Plan. He used a lot of industry language I recognized and arranged it in ways I didn't always agree with, but I kept my fork moving and my opinions to myself. Then he mentioned they'd be looking at trimming the Mid-Ohio terminal workforce. Streamlining, that was the word he used. I put my fork down. Those are mostly drivers and dock hands, I said. People with families. Colton looked at me, then at Dana. Then he leaned back the way people lean back when they've decided to be patient with someone. With all due respect, Dad. He set his wine glass down. The logistics industry in 2024 is unrecognizable from what it was when you were running things. The margins don't leave room for sentiment, to be honest with you. Just a beat of a pause, making sure you were listening. I would never hire someone like you to make those calls today. Not without a formal operations background. The stakes are just too different now. The table went quiet. Caden stopped mid-sentence about his cartoon. Dana looked at her plate. I picked up my fork. I finished what was on it. I helped clear the table after dinner, played one round of a card game with Caden, and kissed Dana goodnight at the door. I shook Colton's hand on the way out. Firm grip. Eyes that moved past my shoulder the way they did when he considered a conversation finished. I drove the 51 miles home on Route 40 without the radio. Dana called before I got to the driveway. He didn't mean it the way it sounded, Dad. Please don't make this a thing. Okay, I said. I didn't make it a thing. Not that night. If this story is landing for you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me keep going. 6 weeks later, Colton called on a Wednesday afternoon. Said Meridian was doing a company-wide town hall the following Tuesday at the Route 40 terminal. He'd like me to come as a family guest. I think it'd be good for you to see how we've evolved the operation, he said. Give you a real picture of what the business looks like now. He had a particular way of pausing after a sentence like that, letting it settle. I said I'd be there. I didn't explain why. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes. Then I called Rupert. Pull out the Meridian operating agreement, I said, specifically Section 9.2 and Section 5.1. Tell me they're still intact. Rupert called back in 40 minutes. Nobody's touched them. Not even a proposed amendment. You want me to do anything with them? Not yet, I said. Just needed to hear it. Then I sent a short email to Maxine Aller, Meridian's Director of Compliance. I'd met Maxine twice, once at the closing, once at a regulatory review at the Columbus terminal. She was the kind of person who takes notes with her eyes even when she isn't holding a pen. Her title meant she reported directly to the board, not to any individual executive. The email was brief. Maxine, I'll be attending Tuesday's town hall as a guest. Per Section 9.2 and Section 5.1 of the operating agreement, please have the retained interest documentation available if it becomes relevant. Thank you, Arlo Bassett. Her reply came 3 hours later. Mr. Bassett, of course, I'll have everything ready. No alarm, no questions, just, of course. That's when I understood something. Maxine had known exactly who I was from day one. She'd been doing her job correctly, quietly, for 2 years. Holding a document that nobody in management had ever actually read, waiting for the day the person with standing decided to invoke it. Her role was compliance. She didn't work for Colton. She worked for the board, and she'd been ready the whole time. Thursday evening, my phone rang. Elton Briggs. Elton had been dispatching out of the Route 40 terminal since before I put the second truck on the road. He came in early every morning and left without being asked twice. He'd helped me train 4 new dispatch coordinators over the years. Never asked for the credit, just did the work and expected to be treated fairly in return. I had always tried to give him that. His voice was tight when he called. "Arlo, you hear about the forward-ready plan?" "I heard the outline," I said. 35 positions, drivers and dock. Effective April 1st, he paused. Bert Calloway's on that list. Marisol Reyes. 14 drivers who've been running these routes since before the Meridian name went on the door. People who know every carrier relationship, every customer quirk, every shortcut that actually works. I knew those names. Bert had been on the dock since he was 26. Marisol had started as a part-time billing assistant and taught herself everything about DOT compliance over 4 years. She knew the federal regs better than anyone in the building, and she'd done it entirely on her own time. The advisory board provisionally signed off, Elton said. Colton's drafted the implementation memo. It just needs one final signature to go to execution. What kind of signature, I asked, though I already knew. One person's approval, that's all it needs. The operating agreement was clear. Any workforce restructuring, eliminating more than 15 full-time positions, required prior written approval from the retained interest holder. That was me. Had been me since the day the ink dried on the Meridian deal. Not one person in Nashville had ever read that clause closely enough to understand what they'd inherited. "Arlo," Elton said quietly, "is there anything you can do?" I thought about the Thanksgiving table, about Caden going still, about Dana staring at her plate. "I'll be there Tuesday," I said. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The light above the table was the same fixture Lois had picked out at a hardware store on Salem Avenue in 2009. I'd never changed it. Some things you just leave where they are. I want to be honest here. If Colton had only insulted me at that dinner, I might have carried it indefinitely. People say things. Families are complicated. But 35 people, drivers who'd been running these routes for 15 years. A woman who had trained herself into a compliance expert. Nobody in the new leadership had bothered to recognize. Those are not abstract numbers. Those are families in Xenia and Tip City and Springfield who are counting on a paycheck arriving every 2 weeks. That math is different from dinner table math. That's when I stopped being the quiet man in the corner. Tuesday morning I was up at 5:15, same time I kept when I was running the company. I put on dark khakis and a gray flannel shirt I've had for 12 years, worn soft, not worn out. I drove the 51 miles to the Route 40 terminal on a February morning with frost still on the overpasses. The terminal sat at the end of a service road off the highway, a flat-roofed building with a Meridian Freight Mid-Ohio sign out front in navy and silver. Clean sign, nothing wrong with it, but the parking lot layout, the truck bay arrangement, the way the offices sat above the dock level, with windows looking down onto the floor, all of that was my design from 2001. I drew it on graph paper at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. The sign was theirs. Everything else was mine. I pulled in 20 minutes early and sat in my truck. If you've ever driven back to a place that used to be yours and sat in the parking lot before going in, you know exactly what that feels like. Drop a "been there" in the comments. Elton crossed the lot in his work boots and spotted me before he made it to the door. He changed direction and came to my window. "Didn't know if you'd come," he said. His eyes were red at the edges. I said I would. We went in together. Colton was in the lobby near the coffee station with 2 managers from the Nashville office. He looked over when we came through the door and something moved across his face. Not alarm, just a quick internal recalculation. "You actually made it out." He smiled the generous smile of someone who thinks he already knows how the next 20 minutes are going to go. "Grab a seat wherever. You'll get a real picture of where we're taking this operation." I said, "I appreciate the invitation." I left it at that. The conference room held about 50 people comfortably. That morning it was standing room along the back wall. Elton and I found 2 chairs near the end of the last row. A few people nodded at him. No one nodded at me. I was a stranger in a flannel shirt. Colton opened with Q3 and Q4 numbers. Solid revenue, some contract wins in the Toledo corridor. A new carrier partnership he was clearly proud of. The room stayed polite and attentive. He had the posture of someone who'd practiced this, shoulders back, pauses in the right places, eye contact moving around the room in a practiced arc. Then a new slide. Forward ready, phase 1, workforce realignment, effective April 1, 35 positions, drivers in dock operations. The room changed. I could feel it before I could see it. A shift in the quality of the silence. People going still in a different way. A few looking down at their hands. Bert Calloway was 4 rows ahead of me. I could see the back of his neck. Colton kept talking. Operational efficiency, automation pipeline, long-term margin structure. The words came out clean and practiced, and I have no doubt he believed every one of them. Then he looked up from the slide and found me at the back of the room. "We have a guest with us today." He gestured in my direction, easy and open. "Dana's dad. He built the original operation before we came aboard. Dad, why don't you come on up here? Give us a perspective from the ground level. I think it'd be useful for the room." He meant it as a demonstration, the old way of thinking, standing next to the new one, an object lesson in how far the company had come. I stood up and walked to the front. He handed me the microphone with the ease of a man who has never once questioned which direction the room is flowing. I held it, looked at the 63 faces turned my direction. Elton near the back wall, Bert 4 rows in. Marisol on the left side, hands folded flat on the table in front of her. 2 of Colton's Nashville managers near the front, already composing politely patient expressions, ready for the folks see old-timer speech they assumed was coming. I looked at Colton. "Before I say anything, can you tell the room who holds final approval authority on any workforce restructuring under the operating agreement?" A beat of silence. Colton tilted his head. "That would be the Meridian Advisory Board, pending the Nashville Executive Committee." Maxine. I turned toward the compliance director, seated along the side wall, laptop open in front of her. "Would you pull up section 9.2 of the operating agreement and put it on the screen?" Colton straightened. "What? Why would you?" "You invited me up here to give the room a perspective," I said. "Let's give them one." Maxine's fingers moved on the keyboard. She did not hesitate, not even half a second. The forward-ready slide disappeared. A PDF document replaced it. White pages, black text, the kind of formatting that belongs to attorneys and means exactly what it says. The room went completely still. The ventilation system hummed. Someone coughed once and then stopped. Colton turned to look at the screen, then at Maxine, then at me. Maxine scrolled to section 9.2. It filled the screen behind Colton's head. All workforce restructuring plans resulting in the elimination of more than 15 full-time positions require prior written consent from the retained interest holder, Arlo Bassett, whose 35% retained equity interest includes veto authority over all payroll and staffing reductions until a full buyout has been executed pursuant to Schedule B. She scrolled slightly lower. Section 5.1. Payroll disbursement authority for any staffing changes involving reductions in force remains subject to approval by the retained interest holder for the duration of his retained equity stake. The room read it. I could tell by the way eyes moved across the screen and then came back, the way people read something they need to be certain about before they believe it. From 4 rows in, Bert Calloway turned around and looked at me, then looked back at the screen. One of the Nashville managers quietly closed his laptop. A young woman near the middle of the room leaned to the person beside her and said something too quiet to hear. He shook his head slowly. Then Elton Briggs, from the back of the room, said in a voice that wasn't loud but had weight behind it, "That's the man who built this place." And the room understood. 30 seconds of silence. Then someone in the middle section began to clap. One person, a few more joined in. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was the sound of people who'd been holding something in and had somewhere to put it now. Colton stood at the front of the room with section 9.2 projected on the screen above his head. His face had gone very even. He looked at the screen, then at Maxine, then at me, in that order, twice. I let the applause settle. "To answer your original question," I said, "no, I don't see value in eliminating 35 positions that a phased route optimization can largely absorb. I'd like to share an alternative framework if the room has time." Nobody said they didn't. I'd been working on the alternative for 3 weeks, since Elton first called me with the outline of the forward-ready plan. My advisory seat gave me access to the routing data and the contract pipeline. 35% of a company buys you that, if you pay attention. What I'd built was a 12-month route consolidation plan, a voluntary early retirement option with full pension acceleration for 5 drivers already past 60, and a cross-training track for 8 dock positions that could transition into dispatch coordination with a 14-week certification program. Marisol Reyes, as it happened, was already fully qualified to run that program. She'd been running it informally for 2 years. Net outcome, 32 of 35 positions preserved. 3 open roles filled through natural attrition over the following quarter. No forced separations. Margins improved in month 7. I walked them through it. People asked real questions. I answered them. Colton stood off to the side with his arms crossed and said nothing. Afterward, as people filed out, he found me in the hallway near the conference room door. He took my arm, not rough, but definite, and stepped me 2 feet out of the foot traffic. That was not okay. His voice was low and controlled. You set me up in front of my entire team. You invited me, I said. You put me on stage. This is going to affect my standing with Nashville. Anna can call me. I'll be home by 4. You can't just walk into this building after 3 years and override 18 months of planning with a flannel shirt and a PDF. I kept my voice at the same temperature it had been since I walked in that morning. I've been here every month, Colton, signing your paycheck. You just never read who was at the bottom of it. He had nothing for that. A couple of his Nashville people passed us in the hallway. They found something very interesting to look at on the floor. I turned back into the conference room, shook Elton's hand, then Bert Calloway's. I found Marisol near the side wall. She shook my hand and held it a beat longer than necessary and didn't say anything. I didn't need her to. I walked out through the lobby and into the February cold and got in my truck. Sat there a few minutes with my hands on the wheel. Then I drove home. Dana called at 6:40 that evening. I was at the kitchen table with leftover soup. Dad. Her voice was tight in the way it gets when she's been crying and decided to stop. He's really shaken up. You blindsided him. 35 families in Xenia and Dayton are keeping their jobs this week. A long silence. Why didn't you ever tell him, she said, about the agreement, about what you still hold in the company? You could have said something any time in 3 years. You asked me not to complicate things. I honored that. That's not. She stopped. That's not the same thing. Maybe not, I said. But he never asked Dana, not once. Not about what I built, not about what it cost, not about your mother, not about what the early years looked like, not once in 3 years. The line was quiet for a long time. I know, she said finally, very soft. I'm here when you're ready to talk for real. I need a few days. Take them. I love you. Monday morning, 2 days after the town hall, I was in the garage organizing bins when my phone rang. Darlene Forsyth, managing partner at Meridian Capital Nashville. Her voice had the specific kind of careful that comes from having legal counsel in the room. Mr. Bassett, we spent the weekend reviewing the operating agreement, specifically sections 9.2 and 5.1. I want to be direct with you. We were not fully aware of the scope of your retained authority. I understand, I said. We'd like to schedule a formal board session with you in your capacity as retained interest holder. Not as a family guest. A pause. We should have done this from the beginning. Yes, I said. You should have. The board meeting happened the following Thursday in Nashville. I wore khakis and the same gray flannel shirt. I did not buy a suit for the occasion, and I wasn't going to start. Colton was in the room. He presented the forward-ready plan again, this time to a board that had actually read the fine print. They didn't reject his analysis outright. These are not sentimental people, and the underlying instinct about modernization wasn't entirely wrong. But they required the route optimization and cross-training framework to replace the workforce reduction as the primary restructuring vehicle, pending my written approval. At the end of the meeting, Colton shook my hand, firm grip, eyes that moved. Good presentation, I said. He nodded once and walked out. His VP of Operations nomination, Rupert told me 2 weeks later, was tabled indefinitely pending what the board called stakeholder alignment review. That's the language companies use when they've discovered they've been working around someone they should have been working with all along. 6 weeks after the town hall, Dana showed up at my door, on a Wednesday evening without calling first. She stood on the porch in her winter coat, hands in her pockets. I could see she'd been running arguments in her head for most of the drive. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same oak table where she'd done homework for 12 years, the same table where I'd told her about her mother's diagnosis on a Saturday morning in October. The light coming through the window the way it does in the fall. She didn't say anything for a while. "I've been thinking about what you said," she finally started, "that he never asked." I poured her a cup and sat across from her. "He knows the surface version of you," she said. "That you ran a trucking company, that you sold it. He's never once asked what it took to build it, what it cost when Mom was sick, what the early years actually looked like." She looked at the table, and I think I stopped asking too. I got so focused on keeping everything smooth that I stopped asking you what you were actually carrying. "That's not your fault," I said. "I think some of it is." She looked up. "I kept asking you to make yourself smaller so he wouldn't feel like he had to compete with something." I didn't confirm or deny that. She already knew. I put my hand on hers. We sat there for a while, just the hum of the refrigerator and the February wind against the kitchen window. The same window that's been there since 1991. About a week after that, Caden called me from Dana's phone. 6 years old and already operating with more sense than most adults I know. "Grandpa, is it true you own the trucks?" I thought about how to answer for a moment. "I own part of the company that owns the trucks, bud." Oh, a pause. "So the trucks are kind of yours?" "Kind of," I said. "That's really cool," he said. "Can I ride in one someday?" "Absolutely," I said. "Okay, bye, Grandpa." He hung up before I could say anything else. I sat there with the phone in my hand for a minute, smiling at nothing in particular. 2 weeks after that, Elton called, said one thing. "Bert Calloway wanted me to tell you thank you." Then he hung up. That was enough. A few days later, a card arrived in the mail from Marisol Reyes. Inside, she'd written one paragraph in careful, even handwriting. The way someone writes when they mean every word. "Mr. Bassett, I started here as a part-time billing assistant 8 years ago. I never expected to still be here. Thank you for reading the fine print. I plan to be here 8 years from now." I put it on the refrigerator, next to a photograph of Lois, from a company summer picnic in 2011. She's laughing at something just off camera. I don't remember what it was. I like that I don't remember. Some things are better when they stay soft at the edges. Here's what I've had time to think about in the evenings, since all of this happened. I didn't walk into that room to humiliate Colton. I walked in because 35 families were about to learn in April that their income was gone, and the only person with the legal standing to stop it was the man Colton had invited up to the podium as a visual aid. The fact that the truth also happened to answer 3 years of dinner table correction. That wasn't my design. That was just how the math worked out when the paperwork finally came to light. Colton is still employed at Meridian. His plan wasn't entirely wrong. The company does need to modernize, and he isn't a fool. He's a man who confused a degree with understanding, and a title with authority, and being educated with being wise. Those are correctable errors, if a person is willing to stay still long enough to see them. I notified Colton and the board by email the week after Nashville, brief and professional, that I would be attending quarterly advisory meetings going forward in my capacity as retained interest holder, not as a family guest. The board replied within the hour. Colton did not reply. Dana says he's been quieter at home lately. I don't know what that means for the two of them, and it's not my place to decide. What I know is what I built, and what it cost, and what it was worth protecting. He never would have hired me. He cashed every check I signed. That's my story. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't make speeches at the Thanksgiving table. I showed up when it mattered, let the paperwork say what it had always said, and drove home the same way I came in. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been handed a microphone by someone who thought it was a leash? Leave that in the comments. Tell me what you did. And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, share it with them. I'll see you in the next one.